Council just preparing the meeting to be live streamed.
Thank you.
Okay, council members, in terms of live streaming, we are good to go. Just recognizing that Councillor Locke has not arrived yet. But in terms of the technology component, we're good to go whenever council is.
Okay. Can you tell whether she's trying to sign in?
Yeah, I'm not seeing her. I'm just going to touch base with her right now and see if I can get a hold of her.
Okay, we'll give it a minute.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Locke is just joining us.
Thank you. Morning, Anita.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Sorry, I lost the link.
Don't worry, done it many times. Well, good morning, Council. I'll call this meeting to order on January 27th. This is a special council meeting to address the one topic, which is our operational budget. I'd like to let members of the public, staff, presenters, and members of council be advised that meetings are broadcast, recorded, and made available on the internet. There are no minutes. There are no deputations. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest? None of that either. Any questions submitted, Madam Clerk?
No questions.
Okay, so we'll go immediately to our municipal officers and staff reports, and that is a report from our treasurer, Lane, on the 2022 budget. So Lane, maybe you can liven up your screen there for a minute. There he is. So Lane, you're going to go through a deck, which basically is your presentation. And just to verify, would you like questions on each slide as you complete the slide, or would you prefer that we complete the whole presentation and then do questions?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it works well if we have questions as we go. So as we work through the slides, and I'll give a bit of a pause at the end of each tab as well if there's any additional questions.
Okay, I appreciate that. And to council members, it would be helpful for me if you're able to, and if you're okay with it, to just raise your electronic hand and if you have a question, and then I'll recognize you when Lane takes the break at the end of each section, if that's okay with everybody. Super. Okay, Lane, the floor is yours.
Well, great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to council for holding this special meeting. We'll consider next steps for the 2022 taxation and area rate budget. Of course, here we are on Zoom again and going through the presentation of the budget for the second year in a row. But I'll be sharing my screen. And just to confirm, council can see the presentation. That's great. So the presentation is in the same order as the budget binder, which we distributed last week. And as we move through the presentation, I'll make some additional comments that may be relevant, and as we've mentioned already, pause as we go. Hoping this can be as interactive as prior years, and it worked well last year, so hopefully we can do that again. And of course, our management team members are on the call today and available. Typically, if we have any questions, I may have an initial response, but quite often turn that over to members of our team to provide some additional support on that. So we'll wade right in. If I can actually get the screen to move for me. We'll do it that way. So here we are on the budget cycle for 2022. Getting near the end, of course, this is a process that started many months ago. We have distributed a couple of different preliminary year-end documents to our management team and reviewed status of where we are. We'll be updating council on that shortly. Of course, we were able to get the budget binder out last Friday. I will say that the budget preparation this year was particularly challenging, given some of the different expenditures that we had thrown at us from different areas, the insurance sector in particular. But we did get the binder out. Hope council has had a good chance to review it all. I have had some discussions with individual members of council just on some clarification matters, but we'll go through our presentation today. So COVID-19, obviously it's on everybody's mind and has been for the last several years. As I noted at the impacts meeting in December, the pandemic had an impact again on our 2021 financials, and they will have an impact on our 2022 budget. Despite completion of many physical improvements in our workspaces, guards and installation of different devices to ensure people know direction to travel, where they should stop if they're in a customer service area, things like that. There are definitely still direct expenses being incurred in our budget this year related to personal and protective equipment, sanitation, cleaning, and things like that. And actually, when we're pretty much ready to go with some of our budget documents with respect to revenues, of course, we entered modified step 2. And so Mike and I needed to take a look at those budgets again at the arenas because they had a direct impact on the January arena revenues. It is anticipated that we will use all of our Safe Start money that we had received before from the province. And I had commented on that once before, but that money from the province was really very much a welcome grant for us and really helped us out over the last 2 years to ensure that we didn't put our working capital more at risk. There have been some statements from representatives at the provincial level related to the ongoing pandemic and the provincial municipal partnership. So I remain hopeful that there may be some additional funding coming as the pandemic lags on, but really nothing to announce today specific to COVID-19 and nothing included in the budget document with relation to funding. So as outlined on the slide here, our 2021 year end is still very much preliminary, just as we are still receiving some late invoices from suppliers and things like that. We're completing our detailed analysis, and any late invoices are being accrued back to 2021 in accordance with our accounting policy. And as is typical, the year end numbers will be further refined as we go through our capital analysis and bring in grants and things like that. I will say generally the year-end numbers are good, especially given the Safe Restart funding. The building department once again had great numbers, and our local building industry is very active. We were able to offset some significant legal fees in the department as well and still contribute to reserves in 2021. I would anticipate we'd put aside over $40,000 into our reserve there, and that'll help us as we move forward. Likewise, given the relatively light start to the winter, 2021 winter control has finished 2021 with a surplus. And so when I say the light start to the winter, that was in the fall of 2021. So we're going to be able to put aside a small surplus there that will help us build that winter control contingency back up. As council is aware, quite often I'll make a comment at the impacts meeting in December, how we're finishing the year upgrade and things are looking really good. And normally later that day it starts to snow in earnest, and then we basically use that entire budget up. I don't think I made that comment this year, and we ended up finishing the budget in fairly good shape there. So looking at rebuilding that winter control contingency fund back up. And at the landfill site as well, we had good numbers there, and I think that's a direct result of council's decisions there and the implementation of the new tipping fee structure. We were able to set some money aside there and actually prepare for some of the new expenditures coming our way with respect to waste management. Unfortunately, the arenas will have deficits again as expected, and probably to the tune of about $152,000. We may be able to use some excess safe restart money there to mitigate that a bit, but I'm not sure about that yet. The unforeseen deficit that did show up was in the fire department, and while we did expect that our MVA revenues maybe wouldn't reach their target, there were extremely high call volumes again, and kind of a good news, bad news story. We had better than expected practice attendance because of the environment that we were in, and so definitely a really good engagement from the volunteer firefighters. But of course, then that means that we maxed out on our budget with respect to fire practice as well. All of those areas contributed to a significant deficit in the fire department of about $68,000. Now, as we lay out the budget for 2022, and as has been our practice for the last several years, we'll carry those deficits forward so that they're accurately shown on our consolidated financial statement when they're approved, but then we'll clear them with the use of the UMP grant in 2022. So that sets the context for today's discussion, and we'll move on now to the other tabs in our budget binder. So first area is assessment. Obviously, one of the key factors in our budget documentation, and the issue of new growth is always something that we discuss, the impact on the budget and how that benefits us in terms of offsetting some of those initial costs right from the very start, and some of the CPI increases, things like that. The assessment cycle this year will be once again affected. Given the pandemic, the Ontario government has postponed the 2020 assessment update for an additional 2 years. So they've indicated that property assessments for 2022 and 2023 will remain at the fully phased in January 2016 current values. So this means that while MPAC is busy actually doing, reassessments on additions, demolitions, providing supplementary and omitted assessment to the municipality, which we welcome, that there won't be any significant current value assessment changes made over the next couple of years. Our net growth, so our true growth, based on those supplementary and omitted assessments, and also taking into account any demolitions or reductions in assessed values as well, was 0.68% in 2021. That's less than the year previous, when it was 0.86%. But I do believe that there is some pent-up reassessment value that's still not recognized. Unfortunately, we can't use it for our budget and tax rate purposes, but we should see that in our supplementary and omitted assessment runs in the first half of 2022. So when we look at assessment, we start thinking about tax rates, and one of the obvious questions that comes up is what is 1% when we start increasing tax dollars?
Wayne, can I just ask you a question about assessment just before you move on?
Yes.
So just to clarify, because we get these resolutions that come in from time to time from other municipalities. The market, the not doing the reassessment doesn't change the revenue that we receive as a municipality. It may change once we see it all, the percentage that may be charged to different classes, but overall, not moving forward the market value assessment as opposed to bringing on new assessment doesn't change the revenue to the municipality. Is that correct?
That is correct, because really our tax rate is a product of assessment and expenditure. So if assessment goes up, it's incumbent upon me and the management team to look at reducing the tax rate accordingly. And so definitely that delay in the CVA while it may, as you've pointed out, shift between some of the classes, it doesn't directly impact on our ability to raise revenue.
Okay, and the second question, you've pegged based on what you know right now, true growth at 0.68%. But you have indicated that you believe that there is some that is yet to be captured. Is that 10%? Is it 50%? Is it 100%? Just, I know you can't refine it. I'm just looking if you have any sort of quantum in mind when you say they haven't likely captured it.
Yeah, I would think based on just what I know in my discussions with Robert about the activity in his department, and that we were expecting closer to 1%, which is typical of our growth in an active period that has been for the last decade or so. So I would think there's got to be a 0.4, 0.3% of increase in assessed value that's out there, and I'll have a good sense of that probably by May, because that would be the point where we'd get our first batch of kind of new supplementary or omitted assessments from MPAC.
And should that occur, this never happens, but just for illustration, all other things being equal, should this happen, then we would end up with a surplus at the end of the year, right?
Well, in a typical year, yes. This year, in order to meet our budget, I had to actually increase our projected supplementary assessment number. So I have already increased that by $25,000 this year.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Thanks for letting us know. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so moving on then, what is 1%? So I have brought this matter before council in the past, and so 1% at the city of Peterborough is about $1.8 million of new expenditure. 1% at the county of Peterborough is about $481,000, and you'll see that this is getting smaller and smaller. When we get to Selwyn, 1% here is a little over $78,000. So and that's adjusted for real growth. So as a rule of thumb, these slides are really quite telling when you consider the increases that all municipalities face. So in 2022, if $78,000 equals 1% here in Selwyn, that's not a lot of room for increased expenditure or increased spending. So this is definitely a key number for council members to keep in mind when we're faced with new spending pressures, or if we're considering new annual programs and the impacts of any policy changes, for sure. And for most of council members on this term, we'd see that number marginally increases year over year as the assessment growth increases. So 1% in 2022. So this is basically just combining the past two slides. And just I'll point this out before we move on to our next tab, which is talking about grants. So it really relates to comments that I make every year to council in the last few years about the issue of how 3% gets so much airplay in the media. So we're looking at 3 different municipalities here, all who have similar challenges in terms of human resources and cost of living increases, insurance sector impacts, CPI increases across the board. And yet 1% shows a vastly different scenario at 3 different municipalities. So our proposed increase this year, and this is the overall increase in our municipal levy, doesn't even get close to 1% increases at our neighboring municipalities or the upper tier. At the end of the day, we pay for increases with dollars, not percentages. And so this is a challenge when so much media is spent on what is the percentage increase, as opposed to how is it really affecting the typical ratepayer. And we'll get into that typical ratepayer impact closer to the end of the presentation. We'll move on now to the next slide, which is grants and other funding. So while assessment yields taxes, the township is very fortunate to receive a variety of provincial and federal grants. And the narrative put together by Ange and Megan, I believe, provided support there as well, really outlines the span of provincial grants in particular that we received. We have enjoyed very solid support from the province over the last few years, and once again, heading into 2022. So this slide includes two of our core provincial grants, the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, or UMP. We saw a marginal decrease there, but it's been a stable funding, and it has been for the last few years, around $1 million. We have used that to clear deficits at the arenas, this year at the fire service. But for the majority of the time, we're funding one-time specific or capital programs with that funding. And so we really mitigated any risk of that funding being reduced. A very welcome announcement this year was with respect to OCIF. And we received a very significant increase in our OC funding. But maybe more heartening for me was that the OC fund had been re-evaluated, and they're going through a new calculation methodology. And everything I've read at this point seems to imply that this is going to be our stable source of funding for capital improvements and asset management work as we work forward over the next few years.
Sherry, you had a question? You're muted, Sherry.
All these buttons we got to push. So thank you through you. Lane, just for the public's information, if anybody's watching our live stream or will watch it later, can the OCIF money be used to reduce the percentage of taxes, or is it supposed to be used for infrastructure? Is there any anything tied to it that says it has to be used in a certain way?
Yeah, so definitely the intent of OCIF is to support asset management, to support ongoing capital maintenance related to those assets. I think what you would be referring to in terms of offsetting or mitigating tax impact would be more the UMP fund, which is truly an unconditional grant. So that's provided to us unconditionally. Of course, it could ebb and flow based on different factors that are included in that. It isn't just a static figure either. But no, OCIF is meant to support asset management, the new approach to maintaining assets and capital maintenance thereof.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So those are the two areas which are formula-based, right, if you will, from the province. There are many other application-based funding programs, and I know council would have looked through the tab, but we've been really fortunate over the last number of years, and we've got a stellar team here that puts together really great grant applications, provides really quality work going in, and we've had a lot of success. A lot of that should be directed over to corporate services and the team that's over there. On to federal grants. This is our only source of stable funding provided by the federal government, and it's administered by AMO. It has been referred to as federal gas tax, the AMO gas tax. It's actually been rebranded now into the Community Capacity Building Fund, and so I think this would probably be the last budget document there. I would speak about it in these terms, and we'll move on into their new branding effort that's coming forward. This is based on a per capita allocation, and it increased in 2021 by a little over $23,000. Just a reminder here that we have received some additional one-time injection of funding, and I say one time, we actually received it twice, so we received two one-time injections of funding from the federal government, and that's been earmarked for Water Street and some additional resurfacing work throughout the township.
Jerry, you had a question?
Thank you. Through you to Lane. Is it possible to quantify either dollars and cents wise or number of applications that we were declined on based on the verbiage coming back that we were in too good a shape for? I know we've referenced that before, that sometimes that's hindered us because, we've done such a great job in reserves and maintaining our financial status.
That's an excellent question. I think that the last few years have seen us, especially on the application-based applications, the conditional application-based applications. I think we did really, really quite well on those. The ones that you're referring to, a lot of them were more on the water and sewer side of things, where we had set aside reserves, where our system was in fairly good shape, where we weren't, we weren't leaking sewage anywhere, those types of things. So we had really invested in our system. And yeah, it did seem punitive in terms of the fact that we didn't have as bad of a situation as other municipalities that were coming forward. The applications that we've been putting in the last few years are a little bit more in terms of a business case and why do we need the funds and what is going to be the impact. And as I say, the team's put together some really great stuff there, and so we've been successful moving on there.
Thanks, Lane. Anita, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lane, with regards to this particular slide, in the book, in the binder, it talks about, the 541,060. The book says, or the binder says a decrease of $1, but your slide says an increase of 23,525. So am I just reading it wrong?
It may be because of the one-time injection of funding. So I will double check those numbers just to make sure I've got the right one. We did have the increase. That increase maybe was back in 2020, and then it's the same figure again this year. We don't increase or decrease every year. It goes in 2 to 3 year increments.
Yeah, it's just with regards to the binder on page 2 of the grants and funding under the federal tax. In the binder, it's different than what you've got on your slide.
Oh yeah, so that could be something to do with rounding there, because I really don't think it would be just a decrease of $1. And on the slide it's ahead of you, that could have been the increase from 2020. So I will verify that though. Anita, thanks very much for that.
Yeah, it may be that you were putting the $1 decrease against the federal. That's why it showed there. But anyways, we can clarify that afterwards.
I will. Thank you.
Yeah, Donna, go ahead.
Yes, through you to Lane. Lane, I was just wondering, the Modernization Efficiency Grant Phase 3. I know we still have a year to complete that, but have we heard if we're completing the 75,000?
I'll actually move right on to that slide right now, because okay. I did want to share with the council some new grant details. So we definitely have a modernization project that was wrapping up in 2021. We did make new application for round 3, and we just received actually confirmation this week. It was announced at Roma, and I immediately started combing the internet trying to find where our funding model was, and I just need to be a little bit more patient, because I think it was the next day that our mayor received a letter and confirmed that we actually had been successful in round 3 in the application that the finance team had put in. So that we will be moving that forward. That is included in the budget, and because of the fact that it was such an important project. We did have a good feeling about it. So it's a 65-35 cost sharing. And so we have received approval for that, and it's in the budget already. The other grant that I wanted to mention was the Trillium grant. And we had put in a grant for new courts, and Megan and Mike worked on this. Our courts are in need of repair. The difference in this grant is that it was $100 and it's a $400,000 project. So we did not include this in the budget. We didn't know if we would be successful, and because of the impact on the budget and the fact that it was $100, we didn't include it. So we will need a budget amendment for this, because we were successful in other grant application as well. Mike would maybe like to make a few comments to this, but we will have a future report coming to council on that, an update on what would be included, but Mike may want to provide some additional comments now just on that project and what we could look forward to in 2022 and 2023.
Mike?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. We were successful and a little bit surprised because the grant had come out and it was in recreation field and it had to be a rebuild of existing infrastructure. So it wasn't eligible for things like new trails or anything else in the building communities and in promoting health. So when we looked at some of our aging infrastructure, the pickleball, tennis, and sports court really were the one that jumped out the most at us as far as being in need of serious repair. We did a very nice job of making them safe and usable, but because of that, they became very, very popular as well. We saw usership go way up in the pickleball numbers, in the tennis numbers, and at the sports court in Ennismore. We really weren't certain that we would be fortunate enough, but Megan's ability to prepare these documents and to submit the most incredible applications clearly has paid off for us again, because 100% dollars to completely redo the sports courts in both locations. And that's one of the keys. There's a timing issue, but there's also a rebuild issue. Being able to take advantage of 100% funding for something that will be well used for decades and has become very popular due to the influx of both Canadian tennis success, but pickleball, as we're all aware. 5 years ago, when we started talking about pickleball, there was a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainty about what it is. Well, now you can't go into any township without seeing a very active pickleball community. And when they get this news, they will be the happiest residents that we have in our township.
Thank you, Mike. Donna, you got a question about that?
Yes, thank you. Through you to Mike. You look very handsome on TV this morning.
Thank you very much, Councillor Valentine.
I'm just wondering, that 400,000, would you be able to use that for the repairs for the drainage issues on the Bridgenorth Trail? Because it seemed to me that was going to be fairly expensive. Or are you going to use it all on courts?
We don't have any choice on that. It was very much a specific fund. So we wouldn't be able to go outside of the basketball, tennis, pickleball court. We're looking at the possibility of adding to the lake field to make it look more similar to Ennismore, and that would capture some of the gaps that we have. But we have to be very careful because it is about rebuild, and it's quite a specific fund. So we want to make sure that we're compliant with everything, because to get almost $500,000 to be able to repair infrastructure those courts are all more than 25 years old. So we could hope to have another couple decades out of this repair and a lot of good use. So we want to be careful to make sure we stay within the boundaries.
Okay, and I don't know if Megan is on the line, but if she isn't, pass on our congratulations to her, because she is amazing. I'm sure other people help her, but she seems to be the lead writer.
Yeah, she certainly is. She has a talent that's unprecedented, and we will make sure. I'm quite sure that Angela has already done that, but we will make sure that we pass on council's congratulations as well.
Okay, thank you. So on to capital projects.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Of course, we met and had a specific meeting to map out our capital program back in November. But there have been a few amendments. Of course, 2021 and the year end still underway there, but for the majority of the projects that will be completed in 2021, it's just a matter of closing the project out and ensuring that our dollar impacts are properly shown. There were a few projects that didn't wrap up, and so they'll be carried over. So those are included in the binder on the capital program updates sheet. There are a few placeholder amounts there for some of our studies as well. And I should just point out that the capital investments, which total this year, including studies, a little over $2 million. It doesn't include the Water Street project, which is, or the courtship that we just talked about. The Water Street project itself is a multi-year project. It's going to touch almost every department that the municipality has. There's a good chance it would be phased over 3 years, involve road rebuild, water, sewer, storm sewer, recreation with respect to the boat ramp, trails, and roadside amenities and things like that. So that isn't included in the 2.13 million that we have included in the budget for this year. I think that the investments and our ability to actually fund those investments, I think it speaks well to the policies that we have in place and the council's endorsed over the years.
Yeah, Lane, can I just ask you about Water Street, because it's a bit of a it's been a bit of a moving target through the discussions over the last while. It may be useful, because we don't need to get into it today, but it may be useful to come back to a future meeting of council to give us a fulsome update on the scope of work, what years that you expect what scope to take place in, and what we've set aside so far, because we have set some so far, and what you envision being the revenue streams or grant streams in the first, second, third year of the project. It would be just good, and it may still be a moving target. And your response may be, I'd love to do that as soon as I know it, but it would be good to get an update, because it's something that I can say, and I suspect my colleagues, we get a lot of questions on that about when's it going to happen, how's it going to happen, etc. So I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, we can definitely provide an update. I do know that based on our timeline right now, we would actually close the tender document and have it back before council at the first meeting in March. And so I'll definitely have to have some form of financing program in place by that meeting. But we are just finalizing final design and should have an estimate, construction estimate. And that includes all those different components that I was talking about. So yeah, we'll be pulling from a number of different funding streams.
Okay, well, that's good. Yeah. So
yeah, I was just going to say the other members of the team, Andrew, Janice may want to weigh in, but I think it's March that we're bringing it back. We could definitely have a report for council just as a primer before that, if you'd like.
For me, that would be helpful. Angie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it'll likely be the second meeting in March when we'll have the tender results. So it's up to council. We can, at that time, provide a comprehensive overview of the whole project, knowing what the tender amounts are, or we could do that prior. It's up to council.
Well, I think in part it depends on for me, it would be good to get some information in advance and not get it all at once. If what you're looking for is a decision in March, because it would be. But anyways.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay. Sorry to delay us on that. You were about to move on into our capital budget. Sorry.
Yes. No. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We can. And that was I think that was a good line of discussion, because it definitely is a major project, and it is going to be impacting our budget for the next couple of years. So not a problem at all. We'll go through the pie chart here. It shows where the investments are being made in 2022 based on the budget before us today. course, the majority of investments are in roads equipment, or roadside streetlights, different spots like that. The investments in facilities and technology is also included there in the combined general government area. So it gives just in one slide kind of a good overview of where capital dollars or study dollars are being spent this year. Just before I leave this area, I just want to remind Council of some comments that I've made in the past about dedicated capital levies and the importance of these levies as part of some type of comprehensive long-term plan. Now, to be really clear, this document doesn't include any form of dedicated capital levy, but I do anticipate bringing forward a levy, a proposed levy that would be presented as part of our asset management plan. It would be presented to Council in the second quarter this year. There are lots of different versions of capital levies, dedicated capital levies. In my intended version of the plan, that levy would be phased in to build up specific additional capital investment in our community. But we wouldn't have to wait for that to take place, say in year 4 or 5. That somehow we could begin the capital improvement program right away and then phase in the dedicated capital levy in conjunction with some of these other grants that we talked about previously, and use of our reserves that we have on hand. So then at some point, when we had sufficient additional capacity and that had been achieved, then that dedicated capital levy would actually end. And likely, in terms of how we do that with most of our stuff, we would phase that out over time as well. But just to reiterate that that's not included in the budget today before Council, but I just felt it was important that I make the note today. And of course, that needs to be presented as part of a more fulsome discussion on long-term capital planning. I know that it's something that various members of Council have mentioned to me over this term. So I'm looking forward to that discussion in the second quarter of 2022. So just move on now to reserves. We talked about assessment of course yielding taxes and our grants, and we had an update on the capital investments. So reserves are another key funding source for us in terms of capital. It's an area that we set aside funds for future years through various operational transfers. This chart should be familiar to Council. I try not to change the style of the chart so that it's recognizable. We just update the data which is there. So the bottom yellow is our working funds. By far the most reserves that we have is the specific reserves in the middle, and then deferred revenues, or sometimes referred to as reserve funds at the top, and that would be any residual AMO gas tax money, development charges, cash in lieu, those types of things. But as I mentioned, specific reserves is by far our largest component, and that would include reserves to purchase things like our fire equipment, roads construction projects, roads equipment, and to make facility improvements. There are a number of other specific reserves as well. We set aside money for insurance contingency with respect to deductibles. So a few years ago, we had increased our deductibles in an effort to mitigate premium increases. But of course, when those deductibles go up, then we need to have a way of funding those. So we established a reserve for that. Winter control, which I had mentioned earlier, and that ebbs and flows with the winters, but we do have a winter control contingency reserve established. A number of years ago, I had to be maybe 3 elections ago, Angie had proposed to Council that we established an election reserve. And so every year we set aside a bit for the election, and then in the election year we have that reserve that we can draw upon to fund the actual cost of the election. So it goes into our whole idea of stable funding, and we don't have a lot of ups and downs in our tax increases. It's more of a long-term stable funding program. Reserves just generally allow us to plan and take the peaks and valleys out of the net tax levy, and allow us to make any of these purchases that I've just outlined there. And quite simply, it's just good if our reserves are sufficient, and they can provide a solid and stable source of funding for us moving ahead.
But we have a couple of questions on reserves. Donna,
Okay.
go ahead first.
Yes, thank you through you to Lane. At the bottom of the pillars, you have 2022 and a capital B. What does the capital B refer to?
Yeah,
Just,
so that's just budget. So that's just the projected number for the 2022 budget. So and the one beside it with the little p is just a preliminary to show that isn't a final figure for 2021.
thank you.
Okay, the second question comes from me, Lane. So if you're going on that chart that you have up on the screen, what's noticeable is the yellow on the bottom is getting smaller, particularly in 2022. We've got a decrease in working capital, if I did calculations correct, about $196,000, and of which you're putting about 52 into protective inspection, which is services, 46 into roadways, and 43 into the library. So the use of the working capital is to smooth out some of these expenses so that we don't have to be going to the levy for some of these increases all at once. Would that be a fair assessment?
It is definitely a fair assessment, and I'll go through when we get to our impacts tab how we use that in that way where it's, I would say, quite judicious, and we have our decreases in a way that offset maybe one-time expenditures that we know aren't going to reoccur, or maybe we are very quite conservative with our revenue, but we're hoping that it would be higher, those types of things. This year we had to tap into working funds a little bit more than I really felt comfortable with at one point in time, and then we kind of reworked some budget numbers. But yeah, we're using working capital to mitigate these increases for sure. And then this chart is a really good example of that, where you see that yellow bar on the bottom getting smaller and smaller.
Okay, thank you, Lane. So now we're off to impacts.
Off to impacts, which is this tab tends to show any of the influences and impacts that we've had across the budget, and it condenses it down into a few pages. So quite often, if I have questions throughout the year from ratepayers, this is a tab that I would refer to and update folks on and what we had to deal with in the budget this year. In many instances, it refers to things that we've already updated council on, but this is where a lot of the natural discussion, I think, with the ratepayers would flow out of in this tab. So first of all, the gross expenditures with this pie chart shows once again we have a high priority of funding on infrastructure. So our public works area, roads and stormwater. High expenditures in protection, which would include policing, fire, our building inspection and bylaw enforcement. And then in general government, which is our legislative, administrative, and financial work that we do in the township. And then shows our landfill site and the amount that we need to fund, and primarily that is for collection, not the landfill site itself, because of our user fees, recreational library, and then our facilities. So this is a gross expenditure area for this year. This is our net funding requirement. And so as outlined there, the blue bars are basically last year's net levy, and the yellow shows where we had to have increases. And so once again, in one chart, it shows where we've increased expenditures this year related to tax support. And in fact, the waste shows no yellow. It actually is reduced this year because we are using user fees there to reduce the levy in the area of waste management. So another chart that just kind of is a good visual to take a look at if you're chatting with ratepayers. Now to switch from graphs to dollars and cents. So this shows a high level summary of where the net tax levy is being applied. And when you start to take a look at high level summaries, then we'll get a little bit more refined and a little bit more refined. So we're dealing with high level big impacts, maybe policy areas. And then we get a little bit closer and a little bit more where the rubber hits the road as we get down into our department basis. So on this one, we definitely had some increased user fees and receipts this year. So landfill site would be one area. We increased some fees in the recreation area, hoping that we might have a little bit better situation this year over last with respect to sports fields and things like that, hoping that the pandemic will wane by that point. But I would say the majority of our user fees in this area that provide some tax relief are in the area of the landfill site. Organizational policy, HR issues account for about $104,000. So that's things like COLA, grid moves, and things like that that are included in our organizational policy. Area service improvements with HR. So once again, decisions that council has made to improve services to our ratepayers. We heard about, say, bylaw enforcement. We need to be more front and center at our libraries, adding more hours for part-time staff so that we could continue to provide good programming and other services there. So that comes in at 140. Our insurance sector, and this includes really two primary areas. One is in the area of our general liability insurance, but then the other is in the area of our benefits and our insurance there with respect to short-term and long-term disability. So you see the impact there that sector has on our budget for sure. And it's a small number, but I did want to capture here because this is one of council's priority areas. This is the last year of our CIP program enhancement. So we've been phasing in increases to our financial incentives to our private sector. And so this is the last year of that phase in so that we were able to increase our base funding for our CIP program. So when we take a look at across the board on this is the kind of high level summary of the areas that affected our budget this year. And I'll move on into some other slides here as we get a little more refined.
Just before you do, Wayne, just an observation and an appreciation. In going through the binder that you had provided and looking at this recap, it struck me that every one of these things have been before council for discussion in previous reports that have come forward. So it was very useful because I had some background and some reporting that you had done to help me through an understanding. So I just wanted to note some appreciation that all of these items and these pressures we had a chance to have a preliminary consideration of through an earlier staff report. So thank you for doing that. Jerry?
Thank you. Through you. This is a question for both you, Andy, and Sherry. With regard to the insurance sector and our big increase by those thieves in the insurance business, was there any discussion at Roma regarding the insurance and how we're all taking it here?
There was discussion, Jerry. I would be wrong if I said I saw any progress being made. But there was discussion. There was during one of the ministerial accountability sessions. There was a question. I think it was taken by the Minister of Finance. Sherry can correct me if I'm wrong. And it was essentially we continue to review the situation to have an understanding of exactly what's driving these new rates. I'm paraphrasing his answer. Sherry, did you hear anything other than that?
One comment that was made, and I don't know if it's true, was that the thing that we're always talking about with the liability isn't necessarily what is driving up the rates.
So, it's a work in progress is the best I could say. Thanks, Jerry. Blaine, did you want to move on?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So yeah, kind of drilling down a little bit farther, still at a summary level, a functional level or a department level. This kind of shows the areas of our budget where the tax levy increase is occurring. That's included in a little bit more detail in the impacts tab in the budget. The first line, general government, as a net number, that includes general government and facilities. We did experience reduced penalties and interest because our arrears program is actually working well. So kind of a good news, bad news scenario where our arrears are coming down, but then we don't have the tax penalties and interest to come in. We also didn't do as well on interest on our surplus funds as well. Large impacts in these two areas with respect to wages and benefits because of the HR component in this section. We did go through, and I'll go through some of the changes that we had to make to the budget. In this area, we did definitely go through quite a refinement of expenses as we worked down through and trying to find every available bit of administrative expense. So we did have some reductions there as well. With respect to economic development, I'd already commented on that. That's the last year of the financial incentives increase. So that's been phased in over 4 years. Fire service, once again, our big impact there would probably be the organizational changes that we're looking at and things coming out of the service delivery review. So we included a deputy chief in this year's budget and phased that position in to start sometime near the end of the first quarter, start of the second quarter. So that would be directly funded through taxation. I mentioned before the impact on calls. So calls continue to go up, and training, of course, is always a requirement. So as we get new recruits and just ongoing annual training, we did actually mitigate some of the training increases this year by funding the recruit training through the general government reserve, just because we didn't have any other reserve to offset that, and we were in a deficit situation to start the year. So all of our new recruit training this year would be funded through the general government reserve transfer. Fire department was one of those areas actually where the insurance hit the department a little harder than others. So the increase there, a little over $7,000 just in fire service alone. And then, with a fleet that takes the wear and tear and out on the road, and then the type of service that's provided, we have constant equipment expenses there. And so there are some increases in some of those areas as well, but keeping the fleet up to speed and keeping it in good shape. In Department 13, that includes primarily our building department, but it also includes bylaw enforcement and small animal control. So this is part of our ongoing impact of some of the organizational change there. So we had to phase in that position in bylaw enforcement. We did that now over a 3-year period instead of just a 2-year period. But part of the mitigation measures that we did there, we had some accumulated revenue set aside for small animal control and for our heritage committee. So we reduced those accumulated revenue numbers there to offset those expenses. And then, as I say, phased in any increases in bylaw enforcement over a longer period of time. In the area of transportation services, public works, roads, if you will, there's a net increase there. So we did increase in the actual roads department a little over $53,000. Once again, an area there that lots of wage and benefits, so HR expense that goes to that area, given the priority we place on our roads network. A large increase in the insurance premium there, a little over $15,000 in all of those different departments. We did have a small increase in some operating receipts there, but still overall, we see the increase there. We did decrease the winter control component of taxation this year. I don't know if Rick feels as comfortable about it as I do, but we did have to take a look at the sand in particular, and we reduced it back to a level that it's probably best case scenario. If it's worst case scenario, then we'll have to get into our winter control contingency. But given the fact that we do have that contingency reserve set aside for just that thing, then I felt justified that we could actually reduce the winter control budget by about $24,000. So that actually is across the board in terms of wages. So basically a reduction of overtime, hoping that we wouldn't have overtime as much as some years, and also in the decreased materials budget as well. So when we take a look at all of those things, it nets out to $12,500. The other area I guess I should just touch on, and which is included in there as well, is street lighting. And we had made investments in street lighting several, I guess 6 years ago. We made the LED investment. It has reduced hydro expenses. It has reduced ongoing maintenance expenses. And it's actually fully funded now in terms of our internal funding that we did. So we had approximately $50,000 that I had intended on putting into reserve. Instead, we only put the amount of reserve into reserve that had been our debt payment. So we were roughly paying $41,000 a year in debt. So that's the amount that's now a reserve to transfer as opposed to a debt payment. So we were able to right size the transfer to reserves, and as a result, we reduced taxation component there by about $17,000. So once again, be able to pass that along to the ratepayers. Next item, waste management. A lot of kind of pluses and minuses in that department for sure. We do anticipate a collection cost increase, or an increase in our collection contract later in 2022. And of course, we had an increase in 2021 as well. There will be a marginal increase in our operation expenses there, and waste diversion expenses. But by far, the reason that we're able to pass along the decrease is because of increased user fees. So we're entering into year 2 of our phase-in, and I think council will recall that we had from the service delivery review a proposal that the fees on site should increase, and should ensure that we keep up with our neighbors, as well as the ongoing increase in costs. So that's definitely had a positive impact there in that department, and we're able to reduce the requirement on taxation because of those user fees that we have at the landfill site. And just a couple other areas down into our recreation and cultural areas, parks and recreation. Definitely another area that had some HR impacts, benefit charges. Insurance premiums, they're not as great, but also impacting those departments. We did decrease accumulated revenue here quite a bit just to get to this number as well. And we were able to increase a bit of our operating fees and some of our facility fees, but not very much, about $10,000 or so. And in the library, definitely the largest reason for increase there is just increased service in terms of increasing our part-time hours. We only have one full-time staff person in our library. Of course, we rely on volunteers extensively, but we do have another group of part-time employees who work 30 hours a week. And so we're increasing hours to 32 and a half this year on our board recommendation. So we've been able to accommodate that in the budget as well. So that's a review at the department level, if you will, to get it to 3.45%. It's a little bit closer than the higher level that summary that we just went through. And I have some slides coming up to tell us how we actually got to this number.
Thank you, Lane. That's a good overview. Donna?
Yes, thank you, through you to Rob. In the library services, we've got a new space opening soon, the makerspace in Lakefield. And I was wondering if this budget's going to be able to accommodate staffing in that particular space, or if we're going to use volunteers. I'm just not certain about that.
Sure, I could speak to that. Definitely the model that Sarah's putting in place is that we would have some dedicated time where we could do library programming. And so the existing staff that we have, especially with these increased hours, would be able to take care of that. So that'd be whether it be children's programming, adult programming, or just the ability for our tech person to provide some guidance. So there would be certain times when that facility would be exclusively used for library type services. There would be other times when it would be open to the public, and we would have our staff, and that's, I think, the bigger area where we're hoping that we may get some volunteer involvement, where staff and volunteers would be there to welcome the public in and actually show them some of the things and how they would be used. That's a general overview. I'm not sure if Sarah's on the, I just can't see if Sarah's on the call to be able to add if she wanted to add anything or not.
Yep, no, I'm here. Yeah, Lee really nailed it on the head, I think. So yeah, our plan is to open in the third quarter. It'll be a soft opening. I think it'll just be kind of the hours will evolve as we kind of see the needs of our community, but definitely a couple of days set aside for programming. And then a few days that it'll be open to the public. And yeah, we've already been connecting with some volunteers who have very specific skills sets, have worked in makerspaces before, so we'll be pulling them in as well. But yeah, I think it'll just evolve as we go along.
Thank you,
Sarah.
Sarah and Lane.
Okay, so I guess we're on to the department, the summary by department.
I actually have just one more slide before we get over to that, and it's in relation to questions that council has had over the years to say, well, how did you get here, right? And each year we try to get I'd say we, but it's me. I try to get a little better about capturing these cuts as we go, and as we get closer to trying to reach some type of a number that we feel is palatable and justifiable. Sometimes I may not just capture all of our cuts as I should, but I wanted to just go over this slide a little bit. When I originally sat down to look at the budget this year, these top 4 items, and I'll be very clear, the top 4 items are not included in that $351,000. So that's why there's a line across there. We realize that we need to increase our hourly charge on our fleet. Mentioned to council a few times, we're not setting aside enough money for replacement of our fleet, and we traditionally include money there to offset that, and we need to kind of move on and increase that fleet hourly charge. I did some rough math, and just by increasing the hourly amount, I think the impact on taxation is going to be about $65,000. So it's roughly, it's getting close to 1%. We didn't even anticipate that this year because of the other pressures that we were feeling from the insurance industry. We have a community transportation network, which is in pilot phase right now. Angie has been able to work with Trent University to get another agreement in place, which was kind of outside of that pilot. And so in this budget, we're actually setting aside funds from some fare agreements to start to build the reserve for a community transportation network. But at some point in time, assuming the pilot is successful, we'll need to put in tax dollars to fund the community transportation network. So a way to do that would be to start slowly and phase in that dollar value. Last year, we had anticipated about $80,000, and we had to pull that from the budget last year. So once again, this year, it didn't even make the cut to get in our original budget submission. And finally, in the area of our 2 arenas, whenever we have a plant concern, we have to automatically look to the UMP fund or to general government. So we have 2 key facilities, and while we do have a facility reserve that pays for things like HVAC systems and roofs and things like that, we don't have any reserve set aside to pay for specific ice plant things or other things specific to that building, which is because it's a recreation facility. So Mike has a long-term plan there, and we had anticipated setting aside some money for that, and we were able to do that. And also the arena deficits. We have made some progress over the years with the council support. We support minor sports, so that every hour of ice to minor sport is like it's a prime time hour. We support our Olympias, and so we set aside $10,000 at each of the facilities, which is tax supported to fund our Olympias. And in recent years, we've actually increased that funding as well to offset some of our insurance matters, things that are outside of our control. But even after all that support from council, we still have deficits that are in around $170,000 a year. So we need to address that at some point in time as well. Needless to say, these 4 areas at the top, didn't really even get on the table this year because of the pressures that we're facing. So when we actually had budget document that I felt was a fairly good document, had been fairly well thought out, our figure was about 7.65% tax increase. And knowing that that was not going to be a number that Janice or I felt was acceptable to council, we kind of waded in. And so right off the bat, in discussions with our department managers, we were able to reduce expenses by about $34,000. And that's just a little bit here, a little bit there. Maybe we'll fund this through reserve, that type of thing. We look to user fees and operating receipts, and I'm fairly conservative in how I lay those fees out. And so right off the bat, Janice encouraged me to look at things like interest, tipping fee revenues, and reconsider some of our approaches in recreation on our fields and things like that. So by looking at that, we were able to increase revenues and therefore reduce the tax impact. And I will say primarily that was in the area of the waste management. We had some organizational changes, and how we've traditionally done that is we try to phase that in over 2 years. We have a hire midway through the year that we hire. Then the next year we try to offset the second part of that. So some of our organizational changes, and because of some of the areas that they're in, we weren't able to do that. So we had to extend the phase-in period. That was, I would say, in terms of treasure, budgeting, those types of things, I think I was kind of happy at that point. Then we needed to get into some other areas because we still hadn't hit our target. So as the mayor pointed out, we're definitely using up our working capital or our accumulated revenue. So in a number of these areas, I would say I think I was conservative, but at the same time, we were kind of bordering on what if and what if and what if and that type of thing. So if the what ifs happen, then we're into our working capital pretty heavy. Still weren't really at our target number. And so I put here that finance went through a fine tuning. So basically that was just looking at years of history, knowing what was in place coming ahead, and just fine tuning some of our estimates, rounding down, if you will, in some of our expenditure areas. Probably came up with another $29,000. The grant used for an annual expense, that's specific in general government, my department. We have, as part of our asset management plan, a GIS system that we use, and we're including all of our assets on it, so that in a linear way we can actually track that on a GIS system. It is an eligible expense for the OC fund. And in that instance, even though it is an annual expense that we anticipate will be here forever, it is eligible under that grant. So I funded it through the grant. And the very last line item was basically $25,000 that got us to a figure that I felt comfortable presenting to budget. And presenting to budget and presenting to council essentially is a number that if things turn out great and we don't have to really tap into any other areas, I should be fine with it. If not, then we'll be really, really tight in accumulated revenue in general government. So essentially looking at that line by line, using grant revenues for annual expenses and drawing down working funds again, we were able to bring a budget in at 3.45%. I should point out, and we will go through that later on in the presentation, that number will be mitigated by decreases in our police rates. So in both police rates, we are able to have reductions to the area rates. And so the 3.45% will be mitigated by reductions in our policing rate.
Just before you go on, Wayne, Donna's had her hand up, very patient, so go ahead, Donna.
Yes, through you to Lane and possibly Angie. I want to go back to the community transportation. I assume that's the link. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And it will be funded until 2025 by the province. Is that correct as well?
I believe so. I'll turn that over to Ange to answer that one.
That's correct, Donna.
Okay, so the 80,000 that you're predicting into the future, I assume, will Curve Lake First Nation help to defer some of those expenses because they benefit from that service quite significantly?
Yeah, so I think it's a conversation when we get towards the end of the funding period that we're going to want to talk to all our partners, Curve Lake, perhaps Community Care, and get them on board with helping to support the overall operations of the link.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Lane, for going through your in an in-depth way your rationale for trying to get to where you've gotten to. That's I find that a very useful slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll move on then to department highlights and next steps. I think I'll use the same approach that I used last year. I have shortened this section of the presentation quite a bit. Council has the package, definitely had some time to review and clarify, and I'll review highlights as it relates to the impacts. And they may be dollar value impacts, or it might just be an impact as it relates to time invested or effort. And then once again, there'll be a chance to ask any additional questions. So we're really kind of moving now into the summary by department tab in the budget binder. So I've commented on general government. We definitely had decreasing penalties and interest on our arrears. And so as I mentioned, it's a good news, bad news story. A lot of effort that goes into that and really good, solid procedures that the team up front has in place. And so I'm really pleased with that. We had some very significant insurance impacts in these general government areas. That's where a lot of our liability insurance, errors, omissions, and things like that. So the big impact there. Something that Angie and I kind of chatted through this in terms of coming up with a term, and human resources pressures was the phrase that we came up with. And we've been really fortunate to have council support in expanding services to our ratepayers and then resourcing that. And then of course we have succession planning that we're taking into account as well as folks leave of their own volition, as folks retire, right? So there's a lot of effort that goes into not only getting new staff up to speed, but also trying to pull the information out of the folks that are leaving and ensure that the transition is minimalized as much as possible. So that's one of those areas where I was chatting earlier about effort and the amount of effort that's going to go in there. We do have two specific projects as well. So we're finishing up anything to do with our modernization project. But then we mentioned that we have the new grant as well. So for communications and improvements there as it relates to our interaction with ratepayers and this issue that our IT guy talks to me about all the time, Mike, about presence, and so that our ratepayers and our staff will know, where are we? Are we involved in a meeting? Are we here at our desk waiting to take a call? If we're offsite at a meeting and we have our cell phone with us, we can receive voicemails and things like that. So, but all of that is the effort that goes into improving our service to our ratepayers. And of course, in general government asset management plan, I talk about a lot, but it's a plan that hopefully will be a living document and is going to continue on. So there's a lot of effort that goes into those things, as well as true dollar values as well. In economic development, community development, this is, I think, the second year of our annual multimedia marketing plan. So we implemented that last year as it's kind of a new area. And there's some core funding now that Angie and her team now have to implement marketing plans on an ongoing annual basis. So that's included in the budget of this year. And as I mentioned, the year 4 of the phase-in for the financial incentives for CIP and those programs. Our fire service, definitely our motor vehicle accident revenues are declining. They don't impact the budget as much this year as in other years, but we are seeing that insurance companies are just refusing to pay. we will be implementing for the first time the second phase of that new policy, where we actually then turn around and bill the vehicle driver who is charged. And so that will take effort on behalf of the folks that administer that program. I would say by far the biggest impact this year, though, is our ongoing call volumes, which remain high, and the implementation of our service delivery review organizational changes.
Donna, you had a question on this?
Yes, through you to Lane and Gord. I was wondering, Gord, if you have implemented the sending bills to the drivers where the insurance companies have not, do not follow through with payment?
That I'm not sure. It goes over to Lane's side and looked after over on that side. So we send those in. So I'm not sure at this point, Don, if we have or not yet.
Yeah, I could answer that, Chief, for sure. That was what I was referring to there with the new MVA. So we have to wait for a period of time after the actual call before the information is available. And then once the information is available, we're able to access it on the ERIS system, and we go through a billing process here, and we send the bill out to the insurance companies. Invariably, the insurance company asks for more information, and we provide that. And so as we go through that process, I would say from the time we bill until the time we either get a check or we get word back that they're not going to pay, is probably 90 days, maybe 120 days. So because the policy just came in last year, this will just be the first time that we're doing that review versus write-offs versus billing new drivers. So we're just going to be implementing that in Q1 of this year.
So we actually haven't received any money from the drivers involved in accidents.
We have not yet received anything directly from the drivers because they have not yet been directly billed.
Okay.
We're still dealing with the insurance companies at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Okay, so we're off to bylaw enforcement.
Okay, so in building and bylaw, two departments that are within, I can say, are within Robert's area of responsibility, Robert Lamar and Robert Kelly. Budget moves ahead with our service delivery review recommendations as it relates to bylaw enforcement. There's no CPI for our permit fees as it relates to building. There will be a new methodology for calculation that council has approved there with respect to square footage as opposed to value of the construction. So that would have an impact on the building department. As we work through our succession plan there, we have the impacts of bylaw enforcement, some changes there with respect to the manager's involvement, and now that we have a full-time staff person for that. And I mentioned before with respect to accumulated revenue, where we're actually using some of that up over this year and probably next as it relates to small animal control and the Heritage Committee. That will allow us to have more taxation on bylaw enforcement overall, and we'll phase that in over a longer period of time. Public Works. Public Works here is the all-inclusive public works across all departments. Definitely human resource pressures there, as well as we have had folks move on to other municipalities or retirements and things like that. So definitely getting some folks up to speed, trying to ensure that knowledge is transferred, and for new hires, making sure that they understand a rationale or feel welcome to bring in a new way of doing things. And so all of that takes some effort. Definitely major insurance impacts in these areas. And something that Rick may want to just make some comments on, I brought it up with council. We've talked about it a couple of times on the excess soils legislation. There have definitely been some amendments to that legislation which may be favorable to the public sector. So it could be to our advantage, but I think what's even more advantageous for us is the fact that we have a landfill available and can use some of this excess soil as cover. But I think Rick has been dealing with some of the local consultants, and maybe Rick, you could provide a brief update to council just on excess soils.
Hello there, can you hear me?
Yes. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been trying to work through this. It's another thing, work in motion. with this COVID has changed it, trying to get information and what's going on. But we do need soil to put cover on our landfill. Like we can use it for daily cover, and then we have to cover over the landfill that's already finished, and then topsoil go on top of that. So we need all the material we can get. So that is helping us there. The hard part is we still have to get it tested. So we've been working through that. Now we're getting it down. We just have to test it for make sure it's non-hazardous. So Cavian's been helping us out, and they've come up with a plan for us to get that tested. And rather than test every job, we're going to bring it in and dump it off. And then when I get enough material, they'll come in and do the samples to cut our costs on administration. I'm not sure what else I can tell you there. Do you have any questions?
I think Donna does, Rick. Donna, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to Rick. So would this be the same sort of situation where you see on different properties as you're driving around, clean fill wanted, and they absolutely dump everything? So would we take that sort of thing, and is that what we're testing?
No, if they want to bring us any fill in the public, it'll have to be tested before we can take it. Same as the research does. But
Okay.
our own ditching material, if we go and do a culvert, we could take it back to landfill. We now have to test that material to make sure there's no contaminants. When not really contaminants, no hazardous waste in it, which they're very seldom there ever is, because with the landfill, we can take pretty near anything anyways. It's a hard thing to explain. Like the hazardous waste would be, they test it for leachate. So let's say something leaks out of it. So you might have a bit like battery or lead or PCBs. Well, the chances of us having any of that in the material are really slim.
Bottom line is the cost is only for soil that is removed from township property, right?
Yeah, for us is that anybody moving soil now has to get it tested, even the homeowner. If they want to take material off, it'll have to be tested, or are supposed to be tested.
Right, but our costs
Take it
are
up.
only for our own stuff. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I think that legislation definitely is a result of some issues going on up in the GTA area where we have soils, being removed from the core of the GTA and going out to the outskirts and being dumped, and then in some instances, just folks are just walking away and leaving it, right? So that's, I was encouraged to see some of the amendments that came forward in the legislation that provides us with some flexibility, but as Rick's outlined, I think it still is going to be an increased cost. And Rick's doing a great job with Cambium to kind of mitigate those expenses for sure. The last area in public works is where we are relying on those winter control and streetlight reserves to provide some tax room. So we're basically, in one instance, relying on the winter control reserve if we get in a tough spot near the end of the year that we can draw on them. And with respect to the streetlight reserves, we actually right-sized it and are just putting aside less than I might have anticipated at the start. On to waste management. So as mentioned before, we're phasing in the tipping fee increases that we see in various different classes, but primarily in the overall tipping fee, as well as minimum charges. So that has created some tax room in 2022. And our goal there is that we get to a point where taxation only funds the collection contract and maybe some additional waste diversion initiatives that could be implemented at the local level. Of course, our collection contract has a built-in increase already based on our renewal last September, and we're hoping to have an extension this September as well. But if we're successful with that extension increases built into the budget as well. And obviously we have our ongoing clear bag implementation program there, and we've got the folks in corporate services doing some great work with our social media and getting information out there. The front office crew here dealing with any of the concerns that may come in, and Hillary in climate change and her sustainability role helping out there as well. Onto the planning department. So we had an increase in planning fees there, but as directed by council, we actually extended that phase in to allow the local building and development community some time to get used to those new fees as recommended in the service delivery review. So those are incorporated in the budget, but they have been extended out over a few extra years. Of course, we're hoping the official plan update is going to be finalized, and then that will lead us into zoning bylaw amendments and things like that. We have the and service enhancements phased in there in terms of some new staffing, in terms of our new software impacts. We typically have a one-time fee up front with software, and then some type of maintenance going on down the road. So we have incorporated that one-time upfront cost and funded it through reserve, and then the ongoing monthly costs are funded through the fees or taxation. So that wraps up the end of the summary tab. And specific to really how the projects materialized into a tax impact. Ton of work from the management crew and their staff to get to this point. I did want to once again just recognize the work that they did, but specifically Angie and Janice on kind of weaving the narratives into the dollar values. I've really become quite accustomed to how the words and the numbers kind of marry up and explain our plans. It tells the story of where we're investing time and effort and finances. And hopefully council enjoyed reading that aspect of it. We still have some area rates to move on to, but I'll pause there and see if there's any additional questions.
I think people were asking questions as we went along. I don't see anybody's hands up right now. So why don't we get to the Orca rate and the police rates, and then our impact on individual properties. So I think those are the three areas you have left. So go
Great,
ahead.
okay. Okay, great. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So we'll move on to Orca and the autonomy conservation. So our share of their levy went up just marginally this year, a little over $3,000. So it's 1.3%. And as has been our practice, we do establish an Orca rate, which has a separate levy. They're relatively small in relation to the other rates, but it's a transparent process for our ratepayers when they receive their tax bill. With respect to the OPP costs, obviously just in the rural wards, the areas that the OPP services. So we did have a year-end adjustment for 2020, and a reminder again that the adjustments are always 2 years behind the budget year that we're in. So there was a charge again this year from the OPP, an adjustment of a little over $25,000. So that's the second year in a row that we've had additional impacts there on our accumulated revenue, and that's as a result of call volumes and things like that. We have received our estimate for 2022, and so that's been incorporated into the budget, as has been any expenses of the local Smith Municipal Police Services Board or their volunteers. And this is an impact just on Smith and Innismore only, the rural wards. So the area rate levy is decreasing in 2022 for the OPP. Police costs in Lakefield, different type of contractual relationship there than we had in the past. We have our 2022 schedule of costs, and they're up about 2.8%, $17,000. We have not received any additional chargebacks for 2020, and I can say as well at this point, we haven't received anything for 2021 either. And the impact there is only on the Lakefield ward. Obviously, the Lakefield ward is the smaller the ward, but the impact on the ratepayers there is quite a bit larger given the dollar value that we're looking at. So we'll see that in the next couple of slides. But based on the contract charges there and our funding model, we're able to decrease the area rate for that police rate as well. So maybe besides the impacts tab, this would be another area that receives a lot of play during the year, maybe with councillors. Definitely year in terms of some discussions with ratepayers. So a little different this year to explain because there was no reassessment. So it's a little bit maybe clear cut. No change in CVA for the typical homeowner. And as a result, we'll see that the CVA value that we're using has not changed year over year. So in 2022, looking at our rural ratepayer, the annual ratepayer would have a typical home value of about $314,000. That hasn't changed since last year. When we apply the budget figures for the net tax levy and the area rate levy decrease, we're seeing that overall that's projected that our municipal rural ratepayer would see an increase of about $21.61. And that's based on those two. Keep in mind that we still have the county that needs to establish the tax ratios. And so this is based on existing ratios in place right now. I haven't been kind of led to believe that the ratios at this juncture are going to change. If they did, then there would be an impact on this, but this is based on traditional ratios that we have in place.
Hey, Lane, so just a couple of points of clarification if I could. So the 300, and I think we're all aware of it, but I want to make sure the public's aware of it. The 314,173 is the annual assessed value, not necessarily what your home is worth. So that's what it, and that's what our taxation is based on, not what you can sell it for at any given time, but on the assessed value, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important to clarify. And the second thing, so on the portions that we control, which is our general municipal levy, our OPP rate, and the ORCA rate, in Ennismore and Smith wards, the increase would be 2.33.
Yeah, the ORCA rate is not included in this slide. It will be very, very nominal given the fact that it was only a $3,000 increase, but this is just what our council can control.
So 2.33, okay. And Anita had a sorry, Anita, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This goes back, it's a question that goes back to the CVA. So I think the current CVA is based on 2016 values. And I know that COVID has sort of put a damper on updated CVAs. So when they finally do finish or complete their CVAs, is there going to be a huge jump for, let's say, from 2016 to 2020, or are they going to phase in? You know what I'm trying to say?
The 4-year, whether their 4-year phasing is going to kick in.
Yeah. So generally, there's a couple of things there. So with the CVA, when it actually does happen, if they change it, there is some discussion that the phase in may be done a little differently than has been done in the past. So it may not be 4 years. They may roll it forward over a 2 to 3 year period. I think the really key point is, though, and I do get that question, I won't say quite often, but I do get that question often from ratepayers. Well, what happens if I make this massive improvement to my house and then all of a sudden the CVA comes along and it really is going to increase my taxes? And the first thing that I try to say to ratepayers is that assessment is only one factor that goes into taxation. So if we have a province-wide reassessment and if in Selwyn all of our CVA values go up, the first thing that I need to do is look at right sizing our tax rate. So that tax rate needs to come down. And it needs to come down because the assessments went up. And so how is that done? Well, I look at the existing expenses that we have, this windfall of assessment, if you will, and automatically that tax rate needs to decrease. And that's the first exercise that we go through. And then we start building the budget after that.
Okay, thank you. So that was the rural one. It's a different in Lakefield, right?
It is, yeah. So the village rate, and once again, same CVA, so we're using the same house. The difference that we see here is that the police area rate decreases quite a bit more. And as I say, that's a factor of the decrease that we had in the rate and the fact that it's a smaller ward, and so we have a bigger impact on the ratepayers that are there. But when we look at the council-controlled expenses for the typical homeowner in Lakefield, the increase is less than 0.5%, It's about $5.48. We still need to take into account, obviously, Orca County and School Board, but this is what our council controls.
You had a question there, Sherry?
Thank you, through you. I'm not sure how you're going to show this online, Lane, but when you do put it up there, can you make sure that it shows that it's the assessed value and maybe give an explanation as to what that means?
With respect to the $314,000?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the slide deck, it's hard to kind of get a lot of that stuff. You try to keep the words down and make it up, but yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you.
I can make
Because it can be very confusing for
Yeah.
ratepayers. Thank you. And so the village is an increase of 0.45%.
That's correct.
Okay.
I will say to council too that I can either provide it sooner or wait until the county sets their rates. That I do have a more detailed sheet that I typically provide to council as well. So as a fuller breakdown, you get to see all the different impacts of all the different rate components as we go. But definitely I can see where when it says annual impact on a typical homeowner, that's a homeowner that's a CVA of $314,173.
Jerry, you had another question?
Yes, thank you, through you. When we're all done with this again, Lane, can you do a comparison with the other townships in the county to see where we stand with regards to our taxes compared to those, please?
Yes, I can for sure. Erica in our department goes through annually. Once we set our final tax rates, she goes through a program that the county municipalities use, Opta, and everybody has to input their rates on that. And we typically reach out to them as well to verify their rates. So we have that, I think, for the last decade anyway, and we can run that through. We've consistently been the lowest tax rate in the county. There was one year that North Kawartha might have popped in there just with some new CVA along the lake up there, but other than that, we've consistently been the lowest municipal tax rate in the county.
Thank you, Lane. Okay, so that takes us to your recommendation.
Definitely, and there's
Just before you do that, just before we go over the recommendation, I think Sherry had a question. No, you muted, Sherry.
Sorry, I was actually going to move the recommendation.
Oh, okay. Well, then go to the recommendation slide. Just go over the recommendation, Lane, and then I'll recognize Sherry to move it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, this is really just moving the process along. It takes the budget that we presented today, essentially accepts that budget, and then I bring forward a report to a future council meeting to adopt the taxation budget. As part of that report, when it comes forward, I will do a PSAB compliance report, which is really just a bit of a PSAB accounting exercise, but the taxation budget essentially is what was presented today, and this would move that process along to final adoption.
Okay, thank you. And so Sherry, you want to move that recommendation?
Yes, I do. And I just wanted to comment that want to thank staff and management, and especially the finance department, for all the work that went into this. And again, it was a pain-free budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. And Donna, did you want to second that?
Yes, and I have a comment as well.
Go ahead.
I would echo Sherry's comments. It's very well laid out. I was just wondering if we could get a hard copy of this slide deck that Lane has used this morning, because it's only 42 pages to run off. If staff would do that for us, and we could keep it with our binders.
Yes, you, Mr. Mayor, I have had that request from other councillors too, so I'll make sure that that gets in your mailbox here for sure.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, so we have a mover and we have a seconder, and I will extend also my appreciation to you, Lane, and all of the staff and management for all the hard work in putting this together. And I'm sure Anita and Jerry and everybody else feels the same way. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, that concludes our business for today, colleagues. We have no other reports to deal with, so I'll look for a mover of our confirming bylaw, which is Anita, and seconded by confirming Donna. All those in favor, carried. Motion to adjourn, Jerry, seconded by Anita. All those in favor. Great. Okay, colleagues, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And again, thanks to the staff and thanks to everybody who was watching. Talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.